Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here, Brian over there. Brian, what you got going on today? How are you doing this week?
Hey man, what's going on? Not too much.
Well, it is Sunday morning, and we recorded, last week on Saturday night, but we're back to Sunday morning now. We're back to Sunday morning out of a scheduling necessity, just because, there were 1,000 things going on yesterday, and we just couldn't, Saturday night is just a time when you're likely to have some social engagements or some prior commitments, and so that's why we're back to Sunday morning this week. We've got our bean juice here, the coffee. That's a drug of choice for this podcast, I guess.
The bean juice won't set in until the second half, so...
we'll look forward to much more jittery testimony, therein, hey?
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll have to kick the tires and see if we think we're better voices in the morning or better voices in the evening. Brian, I'm guessing that you believe that we are better voices in the evening, even though we're recording in the morning this time around.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so you are fresh off a Magic card tournament down in Massachusetts yesterday, Brian. How'd that go for you?
It was... Well, I started off 3-0, but then I lost the last 3 rounds. Or if I had just won one of those rounds, I would have been in the top 8 in the money. So that was brutal. But, I skived off to Puerto Rico last week. And
yes.
So if I had stayed home and tested Magic the Gathering, maybe I could have found the percentage points to scrape out one more win. But instead, I was hanging out on the beach.
Yeah. Well, you can't be working the Magic card circuit every day, and it is frustrating to, be up 3-0 in your playoff series and then, lose all 4 games and not losing the series. That's a tough one to watch that slip through your fingers. That's hard times, but it's worth going to the sandy beaches of Puerto Rico to, even if it costs you a Magic card tournament, I reckon, eh?
Oh, well, yeah. Puerto Rico is pretty nice.
Yeah, you went there. I dropped you off at the airport on Monday, picked you back up on Friday, and there's it does not sound like you had the full Rum Diaries experience, but you must have been blasting your Bad Bunny, and drinking that Puerto Rican rum and doing other Puerto Rican things, right?
Let's see. Well, one thing I did was detoxed from the Zins.
The Zins, eh?
Yeah.
The Zinages.
My body ached terribly for the first day or two.
You think that was because of the Zins, huh?
Well, I don't know if it's from being crammed up on an airplane, or if it's a Zin withdrawal, or some combination of both. But I did want to take the opportunity to detox from the Zinages.
Yeah. See, I just can't imagine. The Zins just seem... these are the nicotine pouches, and obviously being a specific brand of nicotine pouches.
There's also the Alps.
The Alps, yeah, they just seem like they're like a Diet Coke, which is to say they're bad for you, but they don't have a huge impact on your body, or that's how they seem to me. They seem to be very, very light duty. So it's just hard for me to imagine that someone's body could ache going through Zin withdrawals, but...
Well, the Alps are definitely easier to do than the Zins, and therefore contribute towards, I don't know, you could just do them any old time, for any reason, daily.
On the scale of, how much of an impact is this drug going to have on your body? How much is it going to, knock your ship off its keel, knock it off to the side so it has to roll back on its keel and resettle, a drink, like a beer, well, that's a pretty moderate. That's like a medium level of impact, right? But if you smoked DMT, or if you ate a magic mushroom, or did a couple squares of window pane LSD, well, I really feel like that's a much more profound impact on the system. And so, but whereas Diet Cokes and Zinages, these are just minor little adjustments. You're kind of really playing in the shallow end compared to something like magic mushrooms.
Here's the thing about a Zin, right? So if you're going on a long car ride, down to the airport or something, why not pop a Zin? Or maybe you're just going to the grocery store, why not pop a Zin? Or maybe you're gonna play some video games or something. It's why not pop a Zin? Or maybe you just have to go to work. It's I could go to work, or I could also pop it in. And so I guess that's the hook that it inevitably gets into you.
That's the thing about light-duty drugs. I've complained on this podcast many a time about the lack of hangover that comes from smoking weed. And if it would be better, if weed smoking came with a nice hangover so that you would never do it again. For example, we had that beer last week when we were doing this podcast. And I had a great time, while we were doing the podcast. But on the way home, I just started to feel, just felt sick. I just felt ill. My system's just not used to alcohol. And, and plus the beer, it's not just the alcohol, but like whatever else is in the beer is just horrible for you. But you're right. The Zins, well, I don't know. They don't really come with much of a hangover at all. They just you just kind of feel maybe a little not so great, and then they go away. I don't know. But
it's just something to do while you're doing anything else.
Yeah, when you're like driving, a Zin it like makes you feel slightly ill, but then you're not bored because you're slightly ill. Now you're not, you're not like,
it's kind of like exactly the same as doom scrolling like on Twitter, right? Or if you're just like sitting there, it's like, well, I could be slightly entertained by rotting my brain by going through the latest and greatest on Twitter.
Yeah, this is where meditation comes in, man. I gotta do better about quieting my mind and not, getting all twitchy and reaching for the phone and letting it feed you, right? You want to sit there and be, content without stimulation versus letting it, letting it like it's like a little kid, where the parents, they have this food on the spoon and they have to put it in the kid's mouth. That's what the phone does for you. It spoon feeds you. But it's not good. It's not a good habit to get into.
Well, I didn't do anything too crazy in Puerto Rico, but it was nice to, get some sunshine and practice my Spanish and, eat some food and not be bothered. And so what I'm trying to do is not immediately squander my sense of well-being by, packing 5 or 6 Zins and, I don't know, getting back into the grind.
Well, this is the exact vibe I picked up on you when I picked you up from Logan Airport. The other day was that you seemed like you were refreshed. It's the grind that wears you down. Right? It's just hard to have discipline through the darkest days of the New England winter when the sun goes down at 4 p.m. Just after a while, you're like, all right, the hell with it. I'll just pop us in, or whatever, whatever bad habit, or with the hell with it, I'll just get takeout instead of making a nice, nutritious meal. So if you can get somewhere and, see some white sand and some green palm trees in the darkest, like the Februarys and Marches, it's extremely beneficial for the sanity, and only with the best of sanity can you hope to navigate the dizzying array of vices on offer in our world of legalized marijuana, legalized Zin pouches, legalized gambling, and doom-scrolling phones, eh?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I bought a vehicle, right? Which I drove to the Magic the Gathering tournament. It's a 25 Ford Maverick Tremor Edition. And, the price of Bitcoin was tanking, and I needed to buy a new vehicle, so I cashed out of my Bitcoin as net positive to acquire this vehicle. So that Bitcoin is a whole interesting phenomenon because it's like tanking at the same time that our government is like collapsing over Epstein files and whatnot. You got to wonder if there's some kind of connection there or something.
Well, man, I'm struggling to remember what it was now that you mention it, but there is a bunch of mentions of Bitcoin or seeding Bitcoin or something to do with Bitcoin, the Epstein files, but we'd have to dig into it so we can be better informed in order to versus speculating. But there has to be some connection.
Well, the thing is the Bitcoin some kind of like crazy Ponzi scheme, or is it some kind of crazy Ponzi scheme, but it's just better than the Ponzi scheme that is the American dollar that's being printed down to nothing by the Federal Reserve and therefore is valuable. And I guess what I'd recommend is now that Bitcoin's dropped by like $50,000 would be to buy Bitcoin would be my investing strategy if I had any extra dollars after buying this vehicle and going to Puerto Rico. Anyway, the Ford Maverick Tremor, it is pretty sweet. Although one thing is it has all these crazy safety features, and my insurance actually went down when I transferred it from the Volkswagen Tiguan to this vehicle, which surprised me. But the cruise control, it's like on the highway, it's like a good 3 seconds behind the vehicle in front of you is because it has like the radar and whatnot. And so when someone pulls in front of you, it like slows down by 3 seconds. And 3 seconds on the highway is like a lot of room for someone to pull in front of you. So the cruise control is, you're constantly like changing lanes so like no one's in front of you. And your vehicle has like radar functionality. Is it a good 3 seconds on the highway?
There are 6 different settings, so you can be one of 6 different distances behind the car in front of you. And there's one that follows pretty closely, but even that gap is still enough for someone to slide in. And I do agree this cruise control was made by the good people at the Honda Corporation in Japan. and they got no idea about drivers in Massachusetts and how they behave. So I know the pain you're talking about, where it's like, yeah, man, I'm sorry, I just can't leave like 3 car lengths or whatever it is between me and the car in front of me, or I'll just be cut off all day long, so I can't use the cruise control in this scenario. So yeah, that is frustrating. But they don't want to get sued for having a cruise control that rear ends the person in front of you either. So I can see why they're super, conservative on that front. But the Maverick just has the one setting though, eh?
I'll have to work it out. I just figured out how to get it to turn off the rear there's like a rear occupant alarm where it beeps and asks you to look at the back seat to make sure no one's there.
Yeah, okay. So this is why I there's a website called bringatrailer.com, and there is it's like auctions for all these classic automobiles, and I have the 70s and 80s Ford F-150s. I get all the emails for those auctions because that's my fantasy, because those old cars, they're much simpler. You can open up the engine bay and look inside and see what needs to be fixed. And more to the point, it's not rushing in front of you trying to guess what you want, or you mean trying to lock or unlock the car or brake suddenly, or start playing your music on you. It's like, please, I will turn on the music. Please, I don't need the auto. The one thing about my car that drives me nuts is that I have turned off the automatically start music in both the Android Auto program and the YouTube music program, but it still just starts playing. Sometimes it doesn't. It just makes me crazy. So you're like near your car, and you've turned it on maybe to warm it up in the winter, and it'll start playing whatever podcast you were on, and you won't notice till you come back out to get your car's warming up. 10 minutes later, you go out to brush it off. Oh, it's been playing my podcast for the last 10 minutes, even though I didn't. It makes me it's a. Please do not guess what I want. I will just push the button. Please. But there's no way I can get that. It just has to be this way. So feel your pain on the cruise control, Brian. I think we did talk about your car last week on the pod because it was Saturday night and you had just bought it that day. And you would come to my house to show it off. And I was remarking on how pleased I was that your jacket colors matched the trim on the Tremor. So that was pretty cool.
Right.
Man, you've had a hell of a week. Just on the topic of Bitcoin, I mostly abandoned Bitcoin and rolled all of my, my savings into like gold. I just think maybe the gold prices, they seem to be performing better than the Bitcoin prices. And with profligate spending taking place down at the old Treasury, U.S. Treasury, it does seem like maybe the days of the dollar being the world reserve currency are coming to a swift end. And I just think that it's a lot upside for gold. And it crashed crazily a week ago Friday, so it was a good time to buy up a bunch of it. So that's what I'm trying now. We'll see how that investment strategy pays off.
Well, I don't hate it. I guess the smart thing to do would be to diversify your portfolio and not over leverage yourself.
Ideally, I would think like 1/3 gold, 1/3 Bitcoin, and 1/3 the S&P would be ideal. But I really don't want to own the S&P right now. You could buy like VOO or SPY, one of those two exchange traded funds. But I don't want to own the S&P right now. I think it's, crazily overvalued and due for a monster crash. But, what's the old saying? The market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent.
Yeah. Well, when the S&P starts to dip, they can always just start throwing some more bodies on the fire and to get that thing rearing back up.
Sacrifice some more children to the dark god Moloch.
Yeah.
Anything to get the old S&P number back up, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so you have already spoken of your time in Puerto Rico, and so that makes me think of the Super Bowl last week. When last we were on these hot mics here, we didn't know the Patriots were going to get blown out in the Super Bowl, and we were still high in spirits, and we were innocent then, and now we know the terrible truth. The game was just a brutal sit for both of us. But our man Bad Bunny, the Puerto Rico's number one son these days, did the Super Bowl halftime show. And I remember you and I were watching it with. Now I like Bad Bunny. I put him on in the car driving around. My Spanish is good enough to pick up a third of what the man is on about. And I thought I was optimistic about the Bad Bunny halftime show, but despite the triumphant, the triumphant reception it received online, I thought it was trash. The Super Bowl halftime show. You couldn't really see much. I don't know. again, this may be the fact that the Patriots were getting their doors blown off that has like affected my perception of it. But my suspicion here is that the halftime show became like a political football. And so if you are on one side of the political aisle, you had to say, this is the greatest halftime show of all time. And if you were on the other half, you had to be like, it's the worst halftime show of all time. And I think it was like middle of the road, forgettable. No one will ever talk about this halftime show again, I reckon.
Well, I certainly didn't recognize any of the songs, or especially like all the songs like that like kind of Mexican sounding beat or whatever. So yeah, I certainly can't like remember the lyrics. I guess the technical presentation or the the choreography and everything that went into it. It probably like exceeded like there was not a lot going on like in Rihanna's Super Bowl. There wasn't like a complex stage setup or anything. I guess I thought it was pretty underwhelming, but it is exactly what you say. Where like depending on what side of the political aisle you're on, it has to be like an outrage or the greatest thing ever. Turning Point USA put on their own halftime Super Bowl show with Kid Rock and some other country singers. And I thought that Nick Fuentes, I saw this on Twitter, made a good point, and that is that the Turning Point USA halftime show was absolute trash. I mean, Kid Rock like looks terrible, and the music is awful, and it's like, I mean, it's just some people on the right are trying to say this was like the greatest thing ever or whatever. And he just made the point that the political right has absolutely nothing to offer, which is like, I would definitely consider that to be the case. So like neither like, the establishment point of view and then, I don't know, this Turning Point USA movement has nothing to offer.
It was all highly forgettable.
Which is why people listen to people like Nick Fuentes. And really, if we could just have like some sane voices, like maybe on this very podcast, people wouldn't listen to the Nazi guy.
I was going to say, Nick, you're saying someone, unlike Nick Fuentes, someone sane who's not going around talking about how Hitler is based.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Gotcha, yeah. Yes, indeed. I'm with you, Brian. Well, I'm still sad about the Patriots, but I did have a chance to go out and see, Robbie the Fire Bernstein, one of the comedians who we're kind of fans of. Well, really a fan of his podcast, whether it's the Dave Smith podcast or the Run Your Mouth, where he's supposed to have Dave Collum on, the Cornell professor. He had him on last year. That's always a great interview because Collum is just the right amount of kooky to be wildly entertaining. He's like smart and like out there.
Well, he seriously investigates things. And I think they talked about Pizzagate like on the last one, and he was saying the validity of this conspiracy theory. Yes. And now it's extremely valid.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're exactly right. It's very interesting to see that language, that nomenclature and terminology pop up in the old Epstein files. But anyhow, I had a good chance to drive out to New Hampshire last night. But I got jammed up again this week doing the essays and the podcast prep and all that stuff. I was up till like 3 a.m. again this week, just trying to tweak I just couldn't get my system failure essay. I couldn't get to where I was happy with it. I spent like 8 hours just trying to tweak it and get it right. And then it came to be time to drive out there. So I drove out there and I had to come back and continue to tweak it out to the shell of the home of libertarian politics out there in New Hampshire. Anyway, pretty good comedy show. I enjoyed that. Usually you come with me, Brian, but the aforementioned Magic card tournaments, you can only do so much in any given day, right?
It's true.
So I enjoyed the comedy, and because of, it was Valentine's Day, obviously I did a Valentine's Day with the lovely Tracy on Friday, the day before Valentine's Day. Not specifically because of Robbie the Fire, specifically because we didn't like the prefix menu at our favorite restaurant, the old MK Kitchen in downtown Gorham, Maine. They did like a fixed menu where you just pay a fixed price by the person and they bring out whatever, a bunch of courses. But we really liked Trace and I really like our go-to meals. Me with the bolognese pasta, her with the gnocchi mac and cheese. And so we decided to go the day beforehand. And one thing that happened is we were walking into the restaurant. Downtown Gorham's got it's like a 2-stoplight town, So there's like a crosswalk where you push the button and then eventually the white figure appears on the indicator sign letting you know it's your time to walk. And there was like a woman crossing the street and she was dressed all in like crossing guard gear. This is at like 6 o'clock at night. And she was dressed in crossing guard gear, like a reflective vest and what have you. And it was her turn to walk, and she was striding, through the crosswalk, like just waving her arms to like indicate the traffic coming from her left and her right to stop, And I was like, man, there are people who are delighted by pushing that button and making people stop. Like, I think these must be the world's loneliest people. It's really sad to see that, like, someone feels that they impact other people's lives so little that they relish having an impact on someone's lives that they're pushing that crosswalk button. Like, I've never pushed the crosswalk button to cross the road. The idea of having blinking lights and having multiple lanes stop for me is like mortifying. Like, when I go for a walk around the city, I'll do a move. We were talking about this the other day, Brian, but I'll do a move where you're approaching a stop walk and here a crosswalk, and maybe not even a stoplight, just a crosswalk on just a regular street. And here comes a car, and they can see that you're going to cross the road, and they're going to like stop for you, and now I feel like compelled to kind of hurry. So I'll often swivel my hips so it looks like I'm going to not go in the crosswalk.
Yeah, you got to change up your body language and try to get them to go.
Get the car to get past, because they're going to be dinking around and slowing down and trying to wait. It's like, please, if we could all just go. But I could, like, I'm driving with cars, like a caravan of cars behind me. I think you complained about this on a podcast 3-4 months ago, Brian. Probably on a trip down to Massachusetts, if I had to guess. But like, the idea of having people stacking up in your rearview mirror and you get the caravan of shame behind you, like, you got to pull over and let people by. Like, I would be horrified if that was me, but some people just seem to love it. So to that end, on the way over here, I got behind a slow person. It was just like this woman in the crosswalk, just going crazily slow. And there's like 5, 6, now 7, now 8 cars behind you. It's like, man, I would just feel so uncomfortable if I was the one holding people up. And ironically, the car that was holding everyone up, I was the number 2 position, and I was just staring at their Mustang badge. The Mustang has a galloping horse for a badge. It's just funny to stare at that while they just go 5, 6, 8 under the speed limit the whole way. Just staring at that galloping horse going, you got to be kidding, man. Maybe they have the 5-liter V8 in that Mustang, and it's a real, like, American icon. But they're slow as hell. They should be driving a Prius. It's terrible.
Wait, so the crossing guard lady, she was wearing crossing guard gear?
Yep, she had like a reflective vest on. She was dressed all in orange, and she had an orange reflective vest on top of all the orange garb. So this, I think, is a person who... you could just tell they were a little mentally ill by the way they were waving at the traffic vociferously. It's like, these people they're already stopped at the light. There's no one's even coming close to going. It's like...
Well, was she just like walking back and forth on the crosswalk, or was she trying to escort some other people across the crosswalk?
No, there was no other pedestrian in sight other than me and the lovely Tracy, on the far side, on another crosswalk a little further down. No, I mean, I didn't sit there and watch to see if she came back across the road, but I think that it's just some people are so lonely. They just want to feel like they're having an impact on other people's lives, even if that impact is just where they stop for you to cross the road. And, I mean, to be thirsty for that kind of interaction, dude, man, you really would have to be in a sad state of loneliness. I think that, we definitely are living out our lives in the midst of a truly, depressing epidemic of loneliness. I think it's hitting a lot. I think it's hitting everyone. There's something to do with capitalism, or with the way that we're controlled, where society wants to atomize us into little cells and keep us looking into our phones and buying subscriptions and not coming together and deriving the fulfillment and satisfaction that comes for free from human interaction. Or we want to commoditize those senses of belonging and satisfaction and sell them back to us, or something like this. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's like the Zins, right? I mean, she could just kind of go for a walk and not try to hold up traffic, but or she could try to get everyone's attention and put on the crossing guard gear, and it's just more interesting, and there's some kind of dopamine feedback. Maybe what you could do is, offer some Alps and rewire her brain circuitry, and now she'll be addicted to the Alps rather than waving at people as she crosses the crosswalk.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like where your mind is headed here. I just think she might need a little more aggressive therapy than an Alp can provide. Maybe a couple bong rips, or even better, 5 dried grams of magic mushrooms to the dome will have her seriously reconsidering her crossing guard attire, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, what you can do is like rewire all your addictions and problems into ripping bong loads, and whenever something ails you just rip a bong load, and then and then you can try to stop smoking the weed, and then fight all your issues like head on in that way.
Well, how's that strategy work for you, Brian?
I don't know, man. It's a pretty corking experience on the whole.
Yeah. Yes. So that's other than having no hangover, right? The other danger of marijuana is that it makes everything great, which is. I mean, that's a valuable tool to like keep in your back pocket, for occasional use. But when it's like a daily thing, like it becomes like, Well, it's like it makes you feel okay even if things aren't okay, and you should be feeling that thirst to achieve or do better or work harder at your job or whatever the things are that we should all be working on, right? The weed will give you a sense of satisfaction or a sense of completion artificially, when you haven't actually done anything, and man, that sort of anesthetization can be super dangerous too. Yeah, you got to watch out for that one. I'm sure that the weed legalization is not going to lead to good things ultimately, but it will also not lead to people being put in cages for minor drug offenses, and it will make it harder for the government to crack down on anti-war protesters. So I mean. Still, like the fact that every other store is now a weed store here in our fair city of Portland, not a great situation overall, eh?
Indeed.
All right, well, not that it's going to help our crossing guard friend. Okay, so turning to the away from our personal lives and to the national news a little bit. This past week saw the expirations of noted actors James Van Der Beek and Catherine O'Hara. Now, I never did watch Dawson's Creek, but I remember James Van Der Beek from the 2002 classic movie Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Most folks remember Van Der Beek from Dawson's Creek, and then, of course, there's Catherine O'Hara. She was the mom on Home Alone who shouted, "Kevin!" But she was also more recently on Schitt's Creek, the successful, I think you can find it on Netflix, the successful, sitcom. With Eugene Levy, the dad from American Pie. Anyhow, both I don't know about Van Der Beek, but Catherine O'Hara, one of the great comedic actresses. She really had a lot of talent. But the thing that links these two, besides starring in TV shows about creeks, Dawson's Creek, Schitt's Creek, is that they died of horrifying diseases of the posterior. Both of them expiring from complications from colorectal cancers. O'Hara at the relatively young age of 71, and Mr. Van Der Beek at the horrifyingly young age of 49. And it's become a common pastime on this show to talk about like Skyrizi and all the butt medications that are on the NFL broadcast that are now over for the year. But it is interesting to see a 49-year-old and a 71-year-old both succumb to colon polyps or just terrible suppurating diseases in various spots in their lower intestine. Just an awful situation, and I just wonder how much the poison food has to do with the deaths of these two beloved actors.
Well, probably a lot. And the food is poison, and you got to avoid most of the things in the grocery store, and you got to see food as fuel and not as something yummy. And you should probably eat, the food in the Matrix, just some gray slop that has the required nutrients.
Comes from a hose that's attached to the ceiling. You just give the nozzle a twist, and it squirts the perfect mixture of like amino acids and like fats and carbohydrates into your bowl. A nice porridge. Yeah,
and then if you're looking for something yummy, you could have a nice bong load or a Zyn or something, and that'll probably be easier on your colon.
Well, so I put this in the System Failure Sub Rosa Club article for today, but you may recall this graphic, Brian. It is internet famous. It comes from 2014. It's made by Oxfam. Oxfam is the company that keeps track of, extreme wealth inequality. But anyway, they came out with this graphic that shows all of around the perimeter. It has all the various brands you find in American grocery stores, and then it shows which conglomerates own those brands, and there's only like 6 of them. And it shows that, all of the different brands. And there's this, when Boris Yeltsin, the president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, visited the United States during the last years of the Soviet Union, 1989, he went famously to a grocery store and was amazed at the array of choices on offer, all the different kinds of packaging and food. And Boris Yeltsin was like, "Oh, this is the glories of capitalism," But except for it's all a facade, right? Really, it's just 6 companies, and they're all in a state of collusion, right? It's not what we would call robust competition in a capitalist marketplace.
Well, it would have been a lot better in 1989.
True.
And then, ironically, Tucker Carlson's going to Russia in
I didn't even think of that.
2018 or so, and doing the same thing.
That is very funny.
That seems like it might be a facade, too. It's hard to judge. It's hard to just trust Tucker Carlson's judgment on the matter.
Yeah, it does seem like he's just talking about how much the food costs in U.S. dollars at the Moscow grocery store, but but how much is the average wage in Russia in U.S. dollars? That would be the comparison. We were missing that piece, so it wasn't exactly what we would call hard-hitting journalism, But Dude, that's a hilarious connection. I never thought about Tucker Carlson going into that Moscow grocery store just like Boris Yeltsin. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, pour one out for our homies, Catherine and James. Sorry they all died of butt cancer way too young. That's a tough one. Here's hoping that we can get the food. Here's hoping that public awareness about the food rises to the point where we will no longer accept the slop that started to be offered to us in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. It just like the quality of the food has collapsed, and all of our butts are forfeit as a result. So let's hope that things get better soon on that front, eh, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, so more crazy news. This is on the UFO front. Down in El Paso, Texas, the FAA came out and announced a 10-day ban on air traffic over the El Paso area. It was a massive ban. Sagar Jetty of Breaking Points pointed out that the ban was far more draconian than any enacted in the days following the 9/11 terror attacks. No aircraft below 18,000 feet, 17,999 and below, and not even medevac ambulance helicopters were permitted in El Paso airspace. And as mentioned, it was a 10-day ban when announced. Now, I have real trouble getting to the bottom of the story because there's been a bunch of official explanations for this that don't match up. It's been incoherent to say the least, but it seems as though first of all they first said the FAA announced they were shutting down the airspace because of cartel drones, but of course cartel drones by the hundreds are a common sight along the U.S.-Mexico border, and yet we don't usually have 10-day airspace restrictions of the kind the FAA slapped on El Paso airspace this past week. So it's like just the fact that there are cartel drones in the area doesn't quite seem to offer an explanation for what's really going on here. So the other thing, but then there was like a revision, and it came out that what is it's not ICE, but Customs and Immigration Enforcement? No, that's ICE. What's the other one? There's another agency that's involved in anyway, but they had a. It's like the dude who got shot in Minneapolis, right? He wasn't shot by an ICE agent. He was shot by CPS or one of these other 3-letter agencies that do a similar thing. Anyway, these people apparently had a high energy laser or a directed energy weapon of some kind that's classified that they wanted to use against cartel drones. This is what started to come out after the fact. And they wanted to use this in the middle of the night on what they thought was a cartel drone. But then the thing they used it on turned out to be a party balloon, like the kind that you'd buy, at the supermarket for your 6-year-old's birthday, just an aluminum foil balloon. This is what they're telling us. And then they, after obviously there was on Twitter was alive with pictures of El Paso airspace with all kinds of drone activity going on. What's one of them? It's like New Jersey of 2024, all kinds of lights in the sky moving in a way that planes do not move. And then I guess they then lifted this 10-day restriction after 8 hours or something like this, just a matter of hours. And so yeah, I don't know. It seemed like there was some miscommunication between the Pentagon and whatever this Customs Enforcement, Border Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, CP. Can't remember the 3-letter agency, but point is, apparently they used some kind of a directed laser weapon, not on what they thought was a cartel drone and what turned out to be a party balloon, and that's why they had to lock down the airspace. Interesting thing is just that El Paso was near a hotbed of, it's like the White Sands, NASA's White Sands testing facility, just outside of El Paso is one of these hotbeds for UFO activity. And then the people, if you go on one of these sites like the Enigma website, there's all kinds of strange UAP reports. People have all kinds of their cell phone footage that they've uploaded. So there's a bunch of UFO sightings before and after this event. Now these could have been drones of some kind. A lot of these UFO sightings are indeed drones, but it just seemed like it was definitely the most significant thing that's happened on the UFO front since the New Jersey incident of some year and 2 or 3 months past. So that was just interesting to see all that go down. The thing that really stuck out to me was just the official explanation was just so all over the road and incoherent. Well, it's just of a kind with basically all official explanations of anything over the past, basically since COVID and maybe going back to before, but nothing that we get told makes any sense. It's as if the reality that we inhabit has diverted so far from what the official version of reality is that they don't even bother to give us a reasonable explanation to bridge that differential anymore. They're like, well, things are just crazy, and you're just not going to get an explanation from us, and we're just going to all live with that, and that's just going to be the way it is. And so, the old El Paso incident of this past week seems to be, another of the same.
Well, I just wish that the dimensional breach or whatever could occur here in Portland, Maine, so I could bear witness to it. I don't know why to be in El Paso. That's hard times.
Well, maybe we'll get lucky. There's still potential that maybe you can personally witness some kind of a dimensional breach or the arrival of aliens or first contact or what have you.
I mean, they seem to be happening with increasing regularity, so maybe we'll get to bear witness to one yet.
Yeah. Well, I would love to see a UFO, man, or a ghost or a Bigfoot or anything, but it's been a whole lot of nothing on my radar. Maybe I'm not open-minded enough.
Well, I think we're as open-minded as possible.
We're trying over here, yeah. You don't want to be so open-minded that you see things everywhere, but I would love to see some kind of a inexplainable event. Anyway, moving on to the next topic here, Brian. You may have seen, I didn't know anything about this woman, Savannah Guthrie, but she's a Today Show anchor. And I saw her on the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade footage of this past Thanksgiving, oohing and eyeing at whatever the latest float was in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. But this woman's 80-something-year-old mom got kidnapped, right? Mrs. Guthrie. And the thing that was interesting about the kidnapping was that she had Nest is the Google company that makes all of the thermostats and the doorbell cameras and things. That's what Google calls their company. I think they bought a company called Nest at some point, a decade or two ago. And so they're the division that makes their doorbell cameras and their thermostats and whatever else is called Nest. And so this woman had a Nest camera on her front door, but it was disconnected. Unclear how it got disconnected. And she didn't have the subscription where you're able to view your footage. Right? So she was not subscribed to Nest. She just had the camera. Someone bought it for Christmas or something. It was out there. And the FBI was able to pull images off of this camera from quote-unquote back-end systems. That was about all that Kash Patel had to say on Tuesday about this. That's about as specific as he was going to get about how the FBI was able to lift video recordings off of this device that was both disconnected and not subscribed. And it really makes you wonder, how much, can the FBI... how much is my phone recording me? How much is it listening to me? And how much of that is accessible to the FBI? And, well, it kind of seems like it's all accessible to the FBI no matter what. Now, the other piece here of this puzzle is the Super Bowl commercial for Ring doorbell cameras. Now, this one's owned by Amazon, right? So there's Nest owned by Google, Ring owned by Amazon. And they had the Super Bowl commercial that they can find your dog. You must have seen this. I remember watching it next to you, so I don't think we commented on it at the time. But the pitch here is that if you lose your doggo, Nest AI will spy on will go through everyone's footage in your surrounding area and see if they can make a visual match with your dog and thereby reunite you with your hound. Except for everyone's like, so Nest just has access to all my footage and they're just going to use it for whatever purpose they want. It really shows how you don't own your data. It's a line of sight into the way that all of our data is being collected and monetized without really our consent or knowledge. And so both the Virginia Guthrie, Savannah Guthrie's mom, and this Nest ad for finding your doggo are two key data points to show you just how robust the surveillance dragnet we're living in really is. The other thing that I have to comment here is in early 2013, I want to say March, Mr. James Clapper, the DNI, he was then what Tulsi Gabbard is now, the Director of National Intelligence, meaning he was supposed to be overseeing all of the spy agencies, right? This DNI position was created in the wake of 9/11 to coordinate among spy agencies because, FBI and CIA each had pieces of the puzzle regarding 9/11, but they didn't coordinate. There was no synthesis, so we created this DNI position to synthesize the workings of all of our spy agencies. And so he paid a little visit to Washington and testified before Congress. Of course, the NSA is not collecting your phone records. I'm aware of no such program. Deny. Only to have the Snowden revelations come out 3 or 4 months later, where, they're recording all your phone calls, and it's all there, and they can access it all, and there's no getting out of it. And to my knowledge, Mr. Clapper has not faced any consequences at all for perjuring himself before Congress, which is normally a felony. So just another data point there, in addition to Virginia Guthrie's Nest cam and the doggo finding Ring cams. And Mr. Clapper claiming back in the day, oh yeah, no, we totally don't collect your data. I mean, it really is, we live in the Jeremy Bentham's panopticon for sure. You remember the old panopticon, the prison where there's a single guard tower in the middle of a big spherical prison so that the guards can see into all of the prison cells at once, like a panopticon. That's where we live. The authorities can have access to all your data. Anything you type into your phone, anything you say around it, anything you do near it, they can probably pull up video footage of. I don't think that you can be too paranoid on this front, Brian?
Oh, yeah. Well, the AI gives them the power to parse the data now, so they can actually find what they're looking for. Well, the Nest feature, was rejected by the Zeitgeist, right? And hasn't Amazon given up on this?
The Nest feature was
the doggo thing.
Oh, yes, yeah. I maybe they did. I did not see this, but I did see there was some substantial backlash to their super creepy doggo finding service.
Yeah, I saw something on Twitter about it, so I believe it's being sold off, or they're not pursuing it. And they paid a lot of money for this Super Bowl ad, and it was a complete disaster.
One thing I did see in the Wall Street Journal yesterday was what is that Anthropic, the company that makes the Claude AI, I think also owned by Amazon ultimately, or at least Amazon's the majority stakeholder in their organization. The Pentagon is considering cutting ties with Anthropic and no longer using their AI services because Anthropic insists it won't just do anything. It's there's a few unethical things we can't do with this AI. And the Pentagon's well, let's get you out of here and get someone in here who can do unethical things. That seems to be, what's going on. And furthermore, on the Anthropic AI front, I don't have the name of the man in front of me, but they're their safety officer, the guy who's supposed to... whose job it is to make sure that the AI's aligned with human interests so that it doesn't turn into a Skynet situation and kill us all or convert us all into paper clips or something else like that, some other misunderstanding, wipe out the human race. This man has up and quit Anthropic, wrote a letter of concern to all of his colleagues and said he was moving to England to pursue a poetry degree and would no longer have anything to do with this nefarious AI systems which are barreling ahead, full steam ahead, without any regard for the possible consequences or for safety guardrails or any of that. It's the first company to get the AGI wins the race, and they don't care what it costs to get there. And so it's a high stakes, winner take all situation. And so we're going to be developing AI with no thought whatsoever to safety. And oh, by the way, if you should happen to carelessly cast your mind to thoughts of safety for a few minutes, you might find your Pentagon contract null and void. So let's not let that happen. That does seem to be where we are in the AI space.
I think our only hope is that they create something that they can't, in fact, control. And our new AI overlord is more just than the lizard people currently in charge.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so we do have a pod. Oh, no, I've got a couple more items here before we get to our podcast clip of the week. The first one, of course, is this. Speaking of weird, one of the things in the Epstein files was the draft announcement of Epstein's death, dated one day prior to the man's actual expiration. And then if you go look at the notice that the government actually sent out to the press, it is the exact same clipping. It's the exact same wordage. I mean, it does appear that the feds had this announcement ready to go before the man expired. Talking about how he killed himself in prison, a day before it actually happened. So that's really interesting. You must have seen this, Brian. This announcement of the Epstein's expiration a day before he actually expired, and it does appear to be legitimate. It's really strange. Now you could be well, maybe the man or woman who was drafting this announcement accidentally just put one number, whatever today's date is -1 accidentally. But the date block has the full it's dated Epstein killed himself on a Saturday, but it's dated. It says Friday, comma, and then the date, and then the year, 2019. And so it's man, they would have had to mess up the date by one number and then also mess up the day of the week by one number. And it seems really unlikely that would have happened. So what is going on here? I mean, it really does seem like Crystal on Breaking Points is well, I don't know. I guess I'm up to a 20% chance that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive, because this is just so bizarre and there's so many strange inconsistencies surrounding the man's death. I guess I kind of feel like Crystal, I was a 0% chance that it was a fun conspiracy to go on the internet and be oh, the earlobes on the corpse don't match the earlobes on the original person. We may have some conspiracy, but seeing all how bizarre these Epstein files are, and this mal-dated announcement being just one exhibit among many, it really makes you wonder, like, how deep does the skullduggery go here? Do we have a situation where the man is still alive somewhere and they just wheeled out some other corpse to try to convince us all, that this connected man had expired in prison, And, well, I mean, if he was still alive, it would certainly explain why, Kash Patel is making the rounds on the podcast with a deer in the headlights look on his face. Having to say, he definitely killed himself. Nothing to see here. So, yeah, man, that is absolutely nuts. Man, it's like just one really strange thing after another. And it's just, you can just feel the tissue of reality breaking down, like the connective tissue that holds us all in the same, perceived paradigm is just breaking down, and it just feels like we've, taken an axe and cut the anchor chain that holds us to reality, and we're now completely adrift on the sea of madness. I don't know how you're feeling, Brian. I assume similarly.
Well, I mean, Epstein is a person who controls governments, like governments don't control him.
Yeah.
And so I think it's extremely unlikely that the official narrative is true. And, well, there's just this drone footage from back in 2019 that I've been familiar with and sitting on for a moment just like this. But this is on 2019 from his island. And let's see. So there's two people talking to each other. It's some security guy in an ATV. Some guy with gray hair from above who... this is Epstein. See, he's noticing the drone footage, trying to remain calm. And then now he's going to retreat into the shade of his I don't know what you call this, a side-by-side, an ATV with the wheels on top. I mean, I don't know, man. It looks just like him, but it's just the way, like, he's talking to a security guard. He's all casual here. He notices the drone, and then he retreats undercover here. I mean, it's, like, obviously not a coincidence. And, like, I mean, if there was, like, no other, like, supporting evidence, you'd be like, well... I'm sure that's not Jeffrey Epstein on his island after his alleged murder. But, I mean, I think it's just a complete failure to, like, understand how things work and the power structures of the world, basically, to think that Jeffrey Epstein, like, actually got murdered in prison and is
Actually
dead.
got murdered or actually killed himself?
I guess actually killed himself. Yeah, because it's his... Originally, because his deranged cellmate is supposed to have tried to kill him or something, and then he's supposedly offed himself. But yeah,
the way the cameras are turned off, the way that the people in the way that the cameras were just accidentally turned off. Remember, the guards had fallen asleep or something. But then the really weird thing was that they never found the noose that Epstein would have used to kill himself. It's like a tiny little cell, and they never found. To this day, the official reports indicate that they were unable to recover whatever the thing was that he killed himself with. I had pictured a sheet from his bed.
Yeah, I guess that's what I assumed also. Yeah. So there was no, like, bed sheet in the cell? Like,
I think there was no indication that the bed sheets were the things that he actually was strangled by. And I think that if you look at the pictures of Epstein's neck, the autopsy report, maybe it's not pictures, but an autopsy report, like the neck injuries are inconsistent with a bed sheet and something consistent with something smaller, like a guitar string or a piano wire or something like that. But I have to get my facts straight. Just to remember that Crystal and Saga were talking about this on our favorite news program, Breaking Points. They were talking about the fact that we weren't unable to discover the device that Epstein might have used to kill himself.
Well, I just don't know, like, what is it that people are struggling with here? Like, what is it? Like, I people, like, don't understand that, like, I don't know, lizard people are in charge, I guess, is what it is. That people are having a hard time with this. That people don't understand about the lights in the sky and the crazy AI and the crazy things our government gets up to. I mean, I mean, if you look at, like, this destruction in Gaza, right, that, like, we fund for some reason. Like what? Like, you can't figure out, like, the kind of sociopaths that we have in charge. I don't know what it is that people don't understand and, like, why any of this would be surprising. And, like, the fact that Crystal is only assigning a 20% chance of Jeffrey Epstein still being alive. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like, how naive can you possibly be?
Well, I remember my last days as a normie was really in 2016. I remember driving to work and hearing NPR banging on about how the Donald was secretly an agent of a foreign power, secretly secretly an asset of Moscow. And they were just going on about Russia for the whole 2 weeks after the election. They were just going on and on and on and on about how the Donald was really a Russian asset. And it gave me pause because I had hated Hillary Clinton for pushing out Bernie Sanders, who was my man in 2016 and in 2020. And so I was rooting for the Donald in 2016 because I couldn't stand the way that the corrupt Clintons had sandbagged him. And I remember I was excited about the Donald. Do you remember the night of the 2016 election, Brian? We watched the Bruins handily beat the Canadians, thinking there was no chance the Donald would be ahead in the polls when we turned over to the election coverage. But once the game was over, lo and behold, we flicked over and the Donald was ahead and would stay ahead and would go on to victory in 2016.
Yeah, well, we flipped over, I think, to Joe Rogan's watch party with Bill Burr there.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then I think we were trying to understand what was going on because the Donald was actually winning, and it was hard to understand.
Yeah. Yes. Now, I couldn't myself vote for the Donald in 2016. I voted for the Jill Stein, the crazy cat lady, and the same in 2020. But I'm sorry, the same in 24. But it was like reality. It was like the last. I remember driving to work and being, maybe I shouldn't be excited that the Donald won because maybe he really is an agent of Moscow. NPR wouldn't tell me that if it weren't so, right? And I was just driving, and I was like, But after a week or two, it became obvious that that the Russiagate story was a complete, frame job, and just an attempt to try to, frame the sitting president or the president-elect. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's the last straw for NPR, because I had been through the ringer with them with the Iraq War in the 2000s. They had just cheerled us into, they were not critical of the things that the government was telling them. The State Department would hold a press conference, and they would just report it without being critical. And there was much soul searching on NPR as the Iraq War turned into a unmitigated disaster about how they were complicit in, cheerleading this war when they should have been doing actual journalism. A novel concept, I know. But then to see them double down in the aftermath of Don's election in 2016, I turned it off and never turned it back on. That was it for me and NPR. Never again. So you're asking how you were posing the question moments ago, Brian, how can people still go around? How can Chris still only be at 20% probability Epstein is still alive? How can people not see that we have corrupt sociopaths and psychopaths ruling over us? The results are obvious and speak for themselves vis-a-vis Gaza. And I don't know, I guess what people are clinging to is not... It's disturbing to think that the people that you have believed, the media, the faculties of discernment, like the apparatus you use to figure out what's going on in the world, it's really disturbing to realize that these people are not trustworthy and that you've been put on and led on all these decades. And I think that is the specific pain point that people have trouble getting past with respect to the fact that reality is dissolving. And that, of course, is the great theme that I like to bang on about in system failure is reality is promulgated by the ruling class. And then when the ruling class starts to fail, as they often, as they do every couple hundred years, every 1,000 years, then the reality they project also, blinks out of existence. And people are just kind of left with no sort of rudder, no compass, no way of navigating or charting reality. And that's where we are now. We all live in our own individual sort of atomized realities. And the last point to put on that is I always think about Terence McKenna, the ethnobotanist, who you can hear his nasally voice on YouTube talking about how the Holy Roman Empire they basically had the intellectual landscape buttoned up in the 13th century. People didn't believe in witchcraft and astrologies and horoscopes. People believed in the Catholic Church, right? People were good Christians by and large, but as the wheels started to come off the wagon and the economics of the Holy Roman Empire started to break down, well, then that's when people started to believe in spiritualism and occultism and obsessions with alchemy and the witch trials and the Inquisition, and all of this stuff starts to happen as the feudal economic system starts to break down and circle the drain and no longer be an effective system under the historical circumstances of the 1300s and the 1400s. And that's exactly where we're at today. Everyone is retreating to their horoscopes. It's like that Carl Sagan quote about from The Demon Haunted World, which you've read 1,000 times on the internet. The quote about how he sees a day where people, clutch their horoscopes and recede into a dark age of superstition instead of being scientifically minded. But it's just that the scientifically minded people are down on Epstein Island, having orgies like Stephen Hawking. There's that picture of him with the two broads. Stephen Hawking, the British physicist, astrophysicist, and he's like crippled from Parkinson's. He can't even sit up, But here he is on Epstein's Island, with two broads in bikinis, with umbrellas, the hurricane glasses with the swirly straw and the umbrella and all the fruit. And you're like, man, this is crazy. So, anyway.
Well, I like this idea that, to your point about NPR declaring Trump to be an agent of Moscow. And, more recently, there's been some effort, I believe by Ben Shapiro and some others, to say that Epstein is some kind of agent of Moscow. Yeah, and so it's just awesome. Like, the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia are just trying to run like a city of God, with this holy petro alliance and have like a just society. And just these shadowy agents from Moscow are just the only thing that they come in and try to disrupt the whole operation. Just disregard the terrible death and destruction and
heard
the Pizzagate and everything else.
Yeah. That reminds me of the interview on Club Random, the Bill Maher's Club Random, where they put on the lav mics and they sit around and smoke a bunch of J-Bones and have a bunch of cocktails. And Adam Carolla was on there like last week or the week before. And they were talking about how Israel is like the first line of defense of Western civilization, and that they're the ones on the walls preventing barbarism from overrunning the rest of Western civilization. And you're like, dang, the Israelis with their insane genocide in Gaza are supposed to be the protectors of Western. You've got to be kidding me. I mean, it's just. They live in a repressive, violent state where a huge chunk of the population has like no political representation, no voting rights, and they're just fine with that. And they're just, it's just bizarre that that's the status quo. So to your point, it's. I can't imagine believing that the Israelis in the United States and I guess the Saudis too are all just trying to run a nice, healthy. A nice, healthy world for everyone, and it's only the dastardly Russians or maybe Muslim extremists, whoever the enemy du jour is the only one screwing things up. Yeah, that is. It's hard to believe that anyone believes it, eh?
Indeed.
All right, well, Brian, I guess we got the podcast clip of the week here. This one is investor from Bridgewater, Connecticut, certain Ray Dalio. He's on the Tucker Carlson talking about. Debt cycles, right? This is what Ray Dalio's specialty is. Talking about the cycles of history. He's got a whole theory, but we can play the clip, and it'll give us a little bit of a window into how Ray Dalio sees things. And, man, it sure is interesting, and I'll explain why it's so interesting, after the clip.
No, you're not really. But just back to the political, one last question. Is it ever resolved? Does the system ever stay intact when you get to a point where people just don't want to compromise at all or even live in the same place? Have you seen any example of where people sort of decide, wait a second, let's enter into power sharing and pull back before this gets violent or we get a king?
In some places, sometimes in dynasties and so on, but they're not often. What happens is there's a reversal or a fixing by somebody who can not, who's strong enough to deal with the issues. For example, we have a debt issue, we have all of these other issues, and can bring people together. But there needs to be almost, Plato would say, the benevolent despot.
Yes.
And that's in his cycle. In other words, there's somebody who can stop the fighting and be smart and impose the disciplines that are necessary. For example, there's a financial discipline. How do we deal with the debt and all the supply, demand, and so on? Can we raise taxes? Can we cut spending? What are we going to do to bring about a budget balance, yes, or not a budget balance, let's say a deficit of 3% of GDP, which would sustain the set of circumstances? What is that financial discipline? What is that way of working together so we do not do each other harm? Because we are at a point, let's say, as we come to the next midterm elections. And there's a significant probability that the
Okay, yeah. So there you have Mr. Dalio laying out some of his views, and of course he invoked Plato. Plato, he of the Republic. And the thing to understand here is that, for example, in the 6th century BC, there was a rash of these people called tyrants who came to power. And the Greek word tyrannos was not a bad word. In fact, it was like a positive term. And a tyrant, a tyrannos, was someone who took power on behalf of the working class. Right? They would advocate for working class reforms or reforms that would benefit the working class, and they would take power, and then they would give the rich some kind of a haircut, for example, and then use public finance to benefit the working class instead of just these narrow oligarchies. Some examples are Periander of Corinth or Solon of Athens. These two cities are 50 miles apart, and both of them in the 6th century BC. Like Solon's Sysactia, or shaking off of burdens, is one of the most famous examples of mass debt forgiveness in history. Solon just basically declared all the debts were now zero, and we're going to start from scratch. So same with Periander of Corinth. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus has a story about Periander of Corinth being advised by a certain Thrasybulus of Miletus, how am I going to govern my state to make it sustainable in the long run? And the answer he gets from Thrasybulus is, well, you have to, it's a demonstration. He goes around and snaps. He goes around the cornfield and starts snapping off the stalks of wheat or the stalks of grain that are higher than the rest, right? Well, Livy gives the exact same story about the last king of Rome, a certain Tarquin the Proud, or Tarquinius Superbus, right? The last king of Rome, this is also the 6th century BC, he had an idea about putting in a similar program in Rome that had been implemented in Corinth and in Athens, within living memory. But when the rich people caught wind of this plot, they ran Tarquin out of town on a rail and installed the Senate to rule in his stead and to promote the interests of the narrow oligarchy over that of the working class. And that became what was special about Rome. What set Rome apart from all of the other civilizations that surrounded it in the Mediterranean basin was this willingness to totally soak their own working class in order to preserve the debts of the wealthy. We all know the sequel to the story. For the next 5 centuries after Tarquin's ouster, Rome was a republic. It did not have emperors. It was ruled just by the aristocracy. And during that time, it was one soaking of the working class after another. Within 15 years of Tarquin's ouster, the plebes began doing their exodus. They would undertake mass strikes. The Senate would be like, all right, well, you can have a political office. We'll call it Tribune of the Plebes. And then that will satisfy the workers and get them to come back to work. But then when the tribunes of the plebes try to do anything, they'll either be hamstrung or outright murdered, as in the case of the two Gracchus brothers who were murdered for trying to advocate for some kind of a redistribution of wealth to benefit the poor. Well, I just bring all this up because the thing about debt is that it piles up like garbage, right? If you have the city has to come around and collect the garbage every so often. If we can't clear the garbage, then you have a problem. Like, even if you can clear most of the garbage, but not all of it, you will still eventually have a problem that garbage will accumulate over time. And debt works exactly the same way. Inefficient systems have a debt overhang. That is to say that people can't clear their debt year after year, so the debts start piling up. But the big difference between garbage and debt, right? See, garbage is just bad, and no one wants garbage, but every debt is an asset to somebody else, usually someone in the oligarchy, right? So every debt, so there is a small faction, a narrow faction within society that is financially incentivized to let the trash pile up, year after year after year. And that's just where we are in America, right? That's just what was happening in 2008. We had all these debts piled up that could not possibly be paid. In the case of the subprime mortgages, the borrower was incapable of making the payments. But the system didn't want to write down the value of their assets to the other side of that debt. And so that's why we had the Federal Reserve come and bail out all the banks instead of coming in and bailing out all of the people who had who had been sold fraudulent mortgages. And so that's what Mr. Dalio is talking about here. The cycles of civilization, right? They're caused by this buildup of debt detritus over time. And eventually it gets to a point where, like, if there's too much debt in your economy, then everyone is paying back debt and no one can spend money in the here and now on actual goods and services, right? They're paying off the debt overhang. And so if you don't have a system that can clear debts periodically, you will eventually end up with disaster. It is guaranteed, right? Either the system has to be efficient enough to clear the debts itself, or you have to have a tyrant or a strong man, right? Tyrannos, right? This is what the Greeks thought of this as a good word, but then the Romans, when the Roman Senate took over for Tarquinius Superbus, they put in a dreadful taboo against anyone declaring themselves king ever again. And they made the word tyrant into an invective hurled against anyone who would dare to try to gain political support by advocating for the working class. And when it came time to kill their economic reformers, the two JCs, Jesus Christ and Julius Caesar, right? These men were murdered ostensibly for the crime of making themselves king. That's why the cross always has the letters I-N-R-I on the top. You go to any church, that's what you will see. And in Latin, it's like Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. You know, that's what the letters stand for. And the same with Caesar, right? He was stabbed by Brutus, his best friend, on the floor of Pompey's theater. And because Brutus, because they accused Caesar of seeking kingship, but what he was really doing was he had a plan to redistribute the land of Rome to make the society sustainable over the long run, instead of just being a run-up to a massive crash, which is the shape that it had, because it had no mechanism of debt forgiveness. And so the last thing I'll mention here is that Brutus, the man who gutted his friend Julius Caesar on the floor of Pompey's theater, he was the descendant of the same Brutii clan that ran Tarquinius Superbus out of town in like 509 BC, back when the Senate took over for the first time. And so you can really see how this whole concept of like kingship, and you can see where Plato fits into this with his idea. Well, we don't want to be run by a mob. You have to understand poor Plato, like his mentor was killed by the democratic power structure that ruled Athens, in the century after Solon of Athens set the stage for that city-state's golden age. So you can just see how Plato would be opposed to democracy because he thinks that a benevolent dictator would be better. But of course, there's no guarantee of benevolence ever in the case of a dictator. And so we're just kind of left with democracy as the best way to hopefully maybe get the interests of the working class advocated for. And more importantly, we need some mechanism of periodically writing off debts that cannot be paid, so that it's the same operation as having the cleaning crews come around and pick up the trash on the side of all the curbs around the city, right? You need to be able to clear your debts, and if you can't, the only alternative to not clearing your debts is disaster, a run-up just like the one we're having now, where the government is printing currency crazily and debasing it, and the price of gold is spiking, and the petrodollar is breaking down, and society is riven and fractured into a whole bunch of multiple, balkanized into multiple cells where we all have a crisis of loneliness. It's all of a kind. So I'd recommend anyone listen to that Ray Dalio interview. It's very interesting. The funny thing about it is that Mr. Dalio is like $100 millionaire or something. He's like one of these big investors out of Connecticut. And so he never thinks of a debt forgiveness, right? He's like, well, we must impose financial discipline. You heard it in the clip, right? But it never occurs to him, what we can do. The problem here is that the oligarchy is always incentivized to avoid the trash pickup, right? Because to them, having trash on the curbs makes them money. In this metaphor, the trash is debt, right? And to them, debt is an asset rather than a liability, like it is to us debtors, right? To a creditor, the debt is a asset that they expect to collect on. And he never thinks about just writing off the debt. You can just make the trash disappear with the stroke of a pen. That's the financial discipline we need. Now, it means that the oligarchy will take a haircut. In 2008, it would have meant that banks failed, but you can just bail out people instead of institutions. And so it's fascinating for me to hear Ray Dalio have such a refined view of the situation, but it never occurs to him that we do not need to be borrowing money from rich people in order to cover the budget deficit, we do simply print the money. The question is, do you have the Federal Reserve follow along in the second market, buying U.S. Treasury bonds to correct the balance of supply and demand for U.S. Treasury bonds and keep the price at a reasonable level? But what you can really do is just, instead of selling Treasury bonds to rich people, you can control inflation by simply taxing it back, money back out of circulation. But you'll not hear Mr. Dalio pontificate about any financial discipline for himself and his fellow oligarchs, right? It's the financial discipline on the rest of us. We need, like, what do you call it? What do you call it, Brian, when the government cuts spending? Austerity. We need austerity measures. That's the kind of financial discipline we need. Not to tell the rich to take a hike. You got plenty of wealth. We're going to have to clear this debt in the name of societal stability. So that's my rant on Ray Dalio.
Well, it's the old sleight of hand trick. Well, one thing, like Turning Point USA, right, used to be one of these like libertarian organizations. Advocating for tax cuts and, I don't know, just saying libertarian things, right? But then it gets turned into, like, a bunch of Israeli donors come in. They get Charlie Kirk married to Erica Kirk or whatever her name was before then. And a bunch of new investors come in and really it becomes like this pro-Zionist propaganda operation now. And so, I mean, the libertarians, I think, if we could actually just follow the libertarian agenda, that would be fine. But they're like a useful idiot for the financiers to use their message when it's helpful and then abandon when it comes time for when there's the mortgage crisis.
When we need to bail out the banks or send more aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf, suddenly libertarian philosophies abandoned. But but you're right. They gravitate towards the libertarians when it's time to cut taxes or to cut regulations. But then when it's time to go to war, no more of this libertarian talk. We're just going to rattle the saber instead. So anyway, it's all a matter of perspective, I suppose. But it sure is interesting to live through such tumultuous times when our shared sense of reality is in a state of collapse. And I can tell that Mr. Ray Dalio, is interested too. But is blind to the things that are outside of his self-interest. So it's just interesting. So anyway, that's Mr. Ray Dalio and Tucker Carlson. And Brian, are we well over time right now for the podcast? I think we are.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, I suppose we'll bring it home then. Usually at this point in the show, I invite all of you out there in podcast land to pay us a little visit at systemfailure.org. There you can read the weekly essays written by yours truly, and if you dare, even sign up to have those essays delivered every single Sunday morning right there in your email inbox. And furthermore, if you'd like to get in touch with either Brian or myself and let us know how your sense of shared reality is breaking down, why, you can accomplish that tidy feat over on the About page simply by clicking on the appropriate name. And with that, I will be back on Thursday with the weekly essay read. Brian, you and I will both be back next week for a regularly scheduled. Hope you all have a great week in the meantime.
All right, see ya.